Now I'm the king of the swingers, oh, the jungle VIP. I've reached the top and had to stop, and that's what's bothering me. I wanna be a man cub, and stroll right into town, and be just like the other men. I'm tired of mugging around, oh.
It is common knowledge that man is a close relative of the chimpanzee. However, research is still ongoing as to how humans first distinguished themselves from these creatures and what brought about the changes. Although many aspects of this differentiation remain a mystery, it has become clear that dietary choices have played a role on the development of humans and impacted our genetic and morphological development when compared to other species such as the bonobo. About 10 million years ago, one of the first dietary differences that separated early primates and allowed them to evolve in different ways was the consumption of ethanol in fruit fermentation. When searching for food, our ancestors once searched only in the trees, feeding on leaves and unripe fruit until a species began familiarizing themselves with the grounds below and consuming the ripe fruit that fell from the trees. As years progressed, the split between chimps and monkeys began to be more conspicuous, specifically in their eating habits. Because monkeys lived higher up in the trees and relied on seeds, leaves, and ripe or unripe fruit as a food source, there was no need for their body to evolve and break down ethanol. Ethanol is an alcohol fuel that's distilled from plant materials such as corn, sugar, and fruits. Hominids, which we evolved from, were frugivorous creatures, meaning their diet consisted mainly of fruit. However, rather than feeding on unripe or ripe fruits like monkeys and gorillas do, hominids were intentionally looking for rotting or fermented fruits whenever they could, which meant their bodies had to adapt in order to break down the increased intake of ethanol. Our ancestors' eating patterns genetically modified their descendants and consequently led to the evolution of the human race. It has been shown that our ancestors' eating habits were specifically looking for fruits that had fallen and fermented. Due to this difference between hominids and monkeys, greater differences between the species became apparent. As years and generations progressed, a specific gene, the ADH4 gene, was enhanced to compensate for the higher intake of ethanol being consumed than that of before. Due to our ancestors' higher intake of ethanol and the enhanced ADH4 gene, today we are one of, if not the only, species that can consume high intakes of ethanol and consume it for pleasure. The daily intake of fermented fruit by our ancestors was one of the earliest changes that set humans on the path we are on today. Not only did the ADH4 gene enable hominids to become more efficient and cause change in humans morphologically, the mutation also coincided with a shift to a more terrestrial lifestyle. Here we refer to a terrestrial lifestyle as one primarily on land as opposed to living in trees. After the deviation to a more terrestrial lifestyle, a further separation between primates and humans was the act of killing and cutting prey with stones or tools. Sharp flakes of rock were uncovered in Ethiopia, indicating that cobblestones were deliberately clashed together to make sharp tools. Short, deep slashes in animal bones from this time period also testify that simple knives were used to cut different muscles out of prey, such as the tongue, or that knives were used to remove chunks of meat from the tendons and limbs of prey. Cutting up food before consumption indicates high levels of intelligence and skillfulness because planning, patience, cooperation, and organized behavior were necessary skills to create knives, kill, and dissect animals before consumption. In different hunting grounds, archaeologists have found dozens of antelope carcasses with cut marks in their bones, suggesting these animals were hunted with weapons. We know this could not have been lions or hyenas because they will consume the entire carcass of their kill. Archaeologists aren't exactly sure which ancestor of the human hunted on these grounds. However, it was most likely Homo erectus or its immediate predecessor. To go back a little, the evolution of meat consumption amongst primates is an interesting development. Originally, all primates relied heavily on fruits and vegetables and rarely ever fed on meats, but eventually some split and began to primarily prey on other animals. One of these primates is our early hominid ancestor. The common chimp and hominid ancestor relied heavily on fruits and vegetables and therefore had dull teeth inefficient for raw meats. By cutting meat into smaller bits with knives before consumption, our ancestor was allowed a more efficient style of eating in terms of conserving energy. This practice evolved physically into features including smaller jaws and teeth in humans, while chimps, apes, and monkeys still maintained a larger snout and duller teeth. Additionally, pounding and slicing food led to evolutionary changes such as smaller teeth, jaws, and guts. One thing is for sure, modern humans cannot survive on raw meat alone. So where did the separation between chimps and hominids occur and what caused it? The exact cause of such an extensive change in human ancestors was about 1.9 million years ago. The third notable transformation of our ancestors, which occurred about 1.9 to 1.8 million years ago, was influenced by the introduction of fire and cooking food. The original line of thought in the 1960s was that fire was an insignificant development in terms of evolution. It was assumed that when our ancestors learned to control fire, they were already human, and therefore cooked food would not have influenced any significant physical or genetic change. Even Charles Darwin was of the mindset that cooking was biologically insignificant to human evolution. However, in recent years, cultural anthropologists have changed their views on this topic, now supporting that the cooking of food, especially meat, had a large influence on human development. It is hard to judge exactly when our ancestors learned how to control fire. Because most dry materials have the ability to burn, historians have difficulty distinguishing between natural wildfires and controlled man-made fire. It can be generally estimated that man learned to effectively control fire around 12.5 thousand years ago, signaled by the presence of carbon residue inside of circular stone formation, which would have acted as a fire pit. Cooking or heating food, especially meat, makes it easier to chew and digest. The energy input from heat pre-digests the food, which means less energy is expelled by the jaw or mouth while chewing and also by the small intestine during digestion. Physically, this change in diet caused adaptation to body structure. The jaw and teeth became smaller and the small intestine also shrunk in size. With a smaller jaw and less protruding teeth came the ability to have more maneuverable lips, a key component in the formation of words and the beginning of speech development. These changes also created a more balanced head shape overall, which made running easier, a task important to primitive hunters. Cooking also releases more nutrients and calories from both meat and vegetables. It is also believed that because less energy was expelled during food consumption, that more energy could be utilized by the brain, impacting neural development. This is likely why the human brain consumes 20% of the body's energy, which is almost twice as much energy as other primate brains require. Considering that each cooked meal provided or conserved more energy than any uncooked food, our ancestors were able to spend less time hunting and gathering and more time developing and adapting in other ways. Meanwhile, it is believed that a diet consisting only of raw vegetation would require at least 9 hours of consumption a day to gain the necessary calories, leaving much less time for other activities. Cooking also came with another benefit. It allowed for the consumption of foods which might have been toxic in their natural raw state. This allowed for the range of edible foods to be expanded greatly. Not only did cooking influence physical traits of humans, but it also impacted the roles of each sex. As our ancestors' desire for meat increased, there was a greater necessity for hunting. Because hunting was an activity predominantly headed by males, females took up the role of cook. The introduction of fire into society also provided a source of warmth, light, and protection from predators. Recent tests have also shown that diets consisting solely of raw, uncooked foods resulted in a lower sex drive in males and harmfully irregular menstrual cycles in women. These results point to the favorability of a cooked diet as it would increase the chances of reproduction. Control of fire also signaled man's increasing control over nature, while cooking suggests planning, teamwork, patience, delayed gratification, and a masterful use of tools, all characteristics symbolic of increased brain growth and development. A new line of thought has also attributed the increased capabilities of the human brain to the necessity to adapt due to migration. Our species is an African one. Our ancestors ventured out of Africa some 60,000 years ago and over time would come to dominate the globe. A long-held theory as to why Homo sapiens' brains are so much more developed than other species was that control over fire increased our potential to think critically and grow mentally. However, nowadays, there are theories arising that it was actually mass human migration 60,000 years ago that forced our brains to achieve new capabilities. The theory starts with why Homo sapiens left Africa, the answer being dramatic climate shifts. Around this time, the worst of the Ice Age was passing and the climate was becoming warmer. What had previously been natural blockades made out of glaciers eventually turned into land bridges that allowed Homo sapiens to pass into new lands. This new explanation as to why Homo sapiens' brains are more highly developed rests on the desperate need to survive. In new environments with new foods and predators, these early humans had to adapt to survive. With migration out of Africa, humans continued to grow while competitors like the Neanderthals died out. While both parties migrated out, Neanderthal remains show a relative lack of innovations. On the other hand, archaeologists have found evidence from a time frame from about 55,000 to 75,000 years ago in South Africa that demonstrates a period of intense innovation for Homo sapiens. In these sites were ornamental shell beads, the first evidence of jewelry, inscribed ostrich eggs, finely grained stones, spears, and arrows. Skeletons show that these early humans were eating seals and had discovered that by burning the landscape, an accelerated growth of edible roots and tubers could be encouraged. Although these are the two leading theories, and each definitively shifted humankind's course in the world, the exact answer is still unknown as to when and how Homo sapiens' brains began expanding into new capabilities. However, what is known is that one of the next greatest developments for humankind would be the consumption of milk. Humans are able to consume the milk of another species with the aid of an enzyme called lactase. Even today, there are many individuals unable to consume dairy products due to a condition called lactose intolerance. However, there is a good chance that individual is not European. A little over 2/3 of the world's population is lactose intolerant. However, that statistic hardly includes any individuals whose ancestry originates from Europe. Approximately 80% of Europeans are capable of drinking milk. For any other mammal, the consumption of milk past infancy would probably cause enormous stomach pains and potentially life-threatening diarrhea. While the main lactose tolerance mutation originated in Europe, pockets of other mutations have sprouted in Africa and the Middle East. However, populations like the indigenous people of the Americas, the Far East, and Aboriginal individuals of Australia never developed the mutation. To this day, the vast majority of Inuits, also known as Eskimos, still do not drink milk. While investigating the lactose mutation in European populations, it's clear that the mutation spread rapidly at an unparalleled rate. While most mutations take time and are slow to evolve, the clear selection for lactase production demonstrates that those who produce the enzyme have an extraordinarily high advantage of survival. In fact, the mutation spread so rapidly throughout the European populations that many evolutionary biologists believe drinking milk was the difference in ensuring a life long and healthy enough to have multiple children instead of dying before reproducing. So, when did this all begin? Approximately 7,500 years ago. By looking at the bones in European populations 10,000 years ago, there is no evidence that milk was consumed. However, 7,000 years ago, in these populations, evidence in the bones points to mass milk consumption. That begs the question, what was happening approximately 7,500 years ago? At that time, humans were also beginning to invent agriculture. With the shift to agriculture came a drastic switch from the healthy and balanced diet from hunting and gathering to a collapse in our health. Of course, agriculture brought benefits like stability, but it also is thought to have caused tooth decay, anemia, a drop of about 5 inches in the average height, a higher infant mortality rate, and diseases like scurvy, rickets, heart disease, diabetes, celiac disease, and even acne. Those diseases weren't the only health problems humans faced at this time. Agriculture also led to close living communities that developed into civilizations. The unsanitary living conditions of developing communities led to numerous new infectious diseases. There is no definitive answer as to what benefit milk had for the populations. However, one of the most prominent theories is that as you follow the trace of civilization, it's clear the lactose tolerance mutation also follows that same path. With increasingly cramped living conditions, new intestinal pathogens were being introduced to the human race. With the consumption of milk, it's highly possible that the sugar in milk acted as an immune response to these pathogens, not to mention that milk has levels of protein and calcium that would boost an individual's health no matter what. With the consumption of milk came a way for humans to survive in the new and deplorable conditions that civilization imposed upon us. To conclude, since lactose tolerance, there have been many more shifts in our diets that have changed the course of humankind and shaped us into the beings we are now. While there isn't enough time to go over all the mutations affected by diet, we hope you learned something new about some of the biggest events that shaped our species as we know it.